thank you for coming. My name's Michal Teague, and the topic of the talk today is inclusive. So I'm going to talk about why that's important to me in my life and show you some of the projects that I've done that have featured being inclusive quite strongly. One of the things that I have done a lot of my life is move cities, move countries, that kind of thing. So, and I think part of that being inclusive is very important for me, because I think, like a lot of people have experienced, when I was growing up, I had examples of bullying and that kind of thing, or being kind of the awkward kid in the corner who didn't quite know how to join in. So for me, it's always been important to feel like I belong, but I tend to prefer to belong to groups where I feel like I'm doing something or have a purpose. I wouldn't say I'm the best at sitting down and just having a coffee and making small kind of, small chat kind of topics. So when I went to Melbourne, again, there was another big move, and I thought, okay, so for me, how can I meet people? What can I do? So this is where I came up with a group called Australian Breastfeeding Association, and I became quite involved in them. And as I'm an artist, what I do is I look for ways that I can help people through the art projects that I do. And this was part of an exhibition where, again, it was inclusive. So I had an open call and people submitted. Everything had to be a circle in size because we were talking about breastfeeding, but everybody submitted their own pieces of work. Typically it was 6 pieces of work. So we had a lot of people make submissions, and then we kind of chose the best 6, and we made little badges out of the artwork. So this exhibition, if you have a look at the next slide, you can see that, and for this woman, it was very personal. Her response was about feeding twins. Okay, so it was a very successful exhibition in a community hub. It had a lot of discussion, it had some media as well, and it was a great way for women to come together and feel supported. That's in my art practice. So here we are, and this is as part of that. It was actually a really big group of women. It was the largest women's organisation in Australia at that time. So it really started me on my focus on really working in groups, but particularly with women, if I can, because that's kind of my area that I like to encourage women, particularly, or be inclusive. So with that, so that's us, and that's at one of the conferences. There would be a big national conference each year, and as part of this, I got involved in getting government funding and things like that. So putting in for grants and applications. So that meant that we were able to bring more people to the conference. Okay, so again, it's that kind of looking at what you can do to include more people. And the other thing that I really like is that people were able to come. We really made sure that there was space where people could look after their babies. There would be a breakout space if the baby was a bit unsettled. We had a room with television feeding from the conference. So even if women did have to go outside, they still felt they were participating in the conference because they could still hear what was going on in the hall. And I don't know if any of you have been parents, but there's nothing worse than if you're out and you're with family, and if your child is being noisy. Of course, it's understandable that you leave the room to be polite, but when you're outside all by yourself with your baby, it can be very lonely. So that's one thing of thinking about who can you include. And the other really important thing I think about being inclusive is not waiting for people to come to you, but to actually invite people to come. Actually to notice that person who's maybe standing by themselves or a little bit insecure and inviting them to join in. Because often people are just too scared or too shy or whatever's going on in their head, that makes them feel that they might be rejected. So that's the really important part for me about being inclusive, is inviting people and asking them to join, not waiting for them, because it's a very brave step to move towards a group of strangers. Okay. So this is another inclusive project that I did using art. So this was for an exhibition called Parking, and it was part of a Big West Festival. So this one I made, which is handmade, hand crocheted, but out of the red and white safety tape that you find on the streets. So with this, I handmade it, and because I was wanting to bring attention to the use of cars in the city, so with myself and a group of 10 other artists, they all made covers for cars. And what was great about this is that the cars so the cover stayed with the cars, and wherever the car drove around the city that day, the person would park their car and put the cover on top of the car. So it ended up it was an exhibition where the artwork would end up anywhere across the city of Melbourne, because the people would park their cars wherever they'd gone to, and then they would put the cover back over the car. So, and then again here, ended up being part of an exhibition and work. But I also really I think it's part of that thing of, do you belong, where are the boundaries, and it's about inclusive. So I often like working with materials that are on the street and telling whether you can go there or you're not allowed to go there. I often find it's quite an interesting place for me personally, is always working out where can I go, where do I belong, where don't I have permission. Okay. So again, and this is up close the work. So often, so that huge amounts of material went into that one. My practice is even very inclusive or collecting. So this collage was made, it was for a billboard competition. I wasn't selected, but it gives you an idea of how inclusive. So the billboard was to go on a street corner. So I walked the length of each street, collecting the signs, and then I put them together to create a circular artwork. And this was part of a work in Turkey. We were working with a council. One of the things that they asked us to do was to create a park with activities for the children. So the piece I created, because I'm very interested in science again, but it was so like the children can play with it or use it for targets or things, or throwing balls. But there was a group of other artists. There was about maybe 10 other artworks that we put into the park for children. This is Underland is another part of a larger project. This one was, again, some people reached out to I was with RMIT in Melbourne, and they had a very large underground car park that had been abandoned as part of, it was a low-income housing estate in Collingwood. So how Underland came about is we applied for, it was community partnership funding from Arts Victoria, and so we got a large amount of funding to have artists in residencies for a year. So we had 4 lots of artists who went in for 3 months to activate the underground for this area, because it had been very unsafe. It was kind of a place where if drug dealers were trying to escape from the police, it had ended up with car chases and police zooming down into the car park. So it had got a reputation for being very kind of unsafe and unsavoury kind of thing. So if we have a look some more. So with the underground, so I did the residency with an artist called Lane Hogarty. And what we wanted to do is, there wasn't a lot of space for children, but what we created was using recyclable materials, we created a very large underground labyrinth. So it was a path that people walk through. So we made spaces out of styrofoam that was recycled, and we created a very elaborate root system, basically. So because the towers were very tall, so it was as if the towers had roots that were growing beneath them in the underground. Okay, so this is all the foam in its raw materials that had come from a recycling plant, and then at the end of the exhibition it went back to be recycled again. And then when we had the opening night, we had a series of movies and talks and projections. The community was able to walk through the labyrinth. But in terms of inclusion, we had lots of workshops for the children. We had, there was other groups, there was a group of crocheters that I connected in with, and they were crocheting recyclable plastics to make kind of strands in the smaller kind of root systems that were going on. And we also had a men's shed who were also doing a lot of the painting. And a men's shed is where it's like a place where men can go and kind of support each other and learn skills and woodworking and things like that. And it's quite a big program in Australia. Next one. Okay, so this is the close-up. And in the very centre, we created like an igloo. Or a little cubby house for the children. So it was small, you had to kind of crawl in, but once you were inside you could actually stand up, but the entrance was quite small. And again, and then it's very hard to see, but we gave, because we're using black lights, so the children were able to draw on the walls using fluorescent markers. Okay, so very interactive, very inclusive. The community was involved in the making process of 3 months and also involved in the opening. They were able to interact with it. Okay, and then you can see children drawing on the walls and enjoying, because when did children ever get permission to draw on walls? Okay, so they had a really good time. So, and then again, also the adults equally really enjoyed the place, you know, very kind of childlike and engaging. You get an idea of the feeling of it. It was very kind of otherworldly. Yeah, busting moves. Okay, and then here. So again, people could actually, there was pipe cleaners, and because of the black light, they could make little things that they could take to the space. And then here, on the very external, the periphery, there was, again, recycled plastics with painting. There was projections. So it was very large. It was at least probably the size of this room. It was probably maybe 4, maybe 5 times the space that was made. And what this really taught me about being inclusive is to really listen to people. Often, sometimes your ideas would change because of the responses from the community and things that they were asking you for. Okay. And some people maybe just participated for an hour. Some people almost participated for a whole length of time. And there's sometimes too, there was one little girl that I always remember her, and that's part, as an artist, sometimes you go in for a couple of months and then you leave. But this little girl, every time we'd have a workshop, she'd just come and she'd lean on me, you know? And I thought, okay, that's what she needed to do. So sometimes you just accept you just let people do what they need to do is part of being inclusive. So this again is part of it's probably hard to get to see the scale, but this again was a big sports field for a school. So I was asked to do a series of different workshops across the United Arab Emirates and go to the schools and do big projects. So it was using, again, my boundaries that I like to do, the tape, where can you go, what's not permitted, but to make geometric structures because they have such a beautiful mathematical tradition there. So in a way, all of this, you can see the lines here. So using the simple thing of measuring out a line and using a compass, and with the kids, young teenagers, to make out these very large-scale diagrams. It was probably about at least 16, maybe 20 metres across. And then at the end of it, they do it, we were doing all this compass, dividing up, measuring, very simple. And then at the end of it, they'd go like, oh, this is maths. And I went, yes. So there's something about this, I think, if you have this space, that you can teach by doing and participating in a very successful way compared to sitting in a classroom and talking. So there's a lot of this kind of inclusive kind of things that I've learnt from these projects that I've done that I bring into my career as I've gone along. this gives you a better idea of how, see here, of how big this space was. And it was part of a day, I don't know why they had the ponies, but they had the ponies for some reason. So it was but that gives you more of a scale, and this is at a university as well. So that, again, it gives you a bit of an idea with the building. Okay, and this we were doing more, in some places we had more space and time, so we tried doing abstract shapes as well. Okay, and another part of my practice, I usually end up doing something with the community. So this was part of 2 big murals that I did for an autism school in Abu Dhabi, and they had a very big outdoor playground. The wall is probably at least 3 times the length on both sides, and so I was doing the murals with them. Sometimes the young people from the autistic school would come help, but also there was a group from a hotel, one of the 5 stars in Abu Dhabi, and they came along and they helped with the painting as well for a day. So often I'll do these collaborative kind of projects that need support. So that was a very nice project to do. Okay. And here, this one, I don't have a lot of photos, but this was while I was in Abu Dhabi. There was with this woman here holding the box or whatever it is with Babs Klein. So with her, she had a group called Feel Great Helping, and I did a lot of projects under the title Camp Creative. So we would go to where low income workers were, and we would either support them by assisting them with food, because often they'd send so much back to their home countries that they were pretty much just eating like it was rice, oil, sugar, not a very nutritious diet. So we would give them, supplement their food with, they liked tin tuna, with fruit, vegetables, those kinds of things, to supplement their diet, because it was amazing. Like you'd often see in the courtyard when we were visiting the women, they'd have these huge kind of containers and things that they were packing up of stuff that they were sending home to their villages. So we knew whatever we could help them with, we knew that a lot more would be going back to support their families in their villages. Okay, so, and this as part of Camp Creative, because what would happen sometimes is the families have become very reliant on the income that they were getting from the women in Abu Dhabi, and so the women kind of felt stuck. Like some women had been there 16, maybe more years, and they felt like they couldn't go home. So they'd missed out on seeing their children, their families grow up basically, because they'd always been away earning the money. So as part of Camp Creative and with Babs, we were talking with them, and they wanted to look at ways that they could maybe earn money when they went home. So as part of that, we looked at projects that we could find to help them with recyclables. So looking at art and craft things, objects that they could make. We also got funds from someone, so we bought sewing machines so they could learn how to do sewing. We also had one of the hotels came and did some computer classes and things like that. So we're trying to give them skills that they could potentially, when they went home, they could still have the possibility of having maybe a small business and making some income. But it was lovely. And this again, often a lot of projects, we would take them out, and this was, we'd also, Babs was amazing, but organising like trips, so she'd get the bowling rink would help do some free kind of access to the bowling rink. Then you'd have a hotel that would do like a morning tea, someone else would sponsor a bus. So it was a lot of coordination, and for many years in Abu Dhabi they ran, it was like they do sales of recycled goods. So I always used to joke with Babs that she was the biggest recycling person in Abu Dhabi, but it was all to raise funds to support the women. And also with this, it was great because a lot of the women who were helping were from overseas. They were just arriving in Abu Dhabi, and it's like, you can feel very lonely, particularly if you don't have a job that you're doing. So these women they got as much out of it as the people that they were helping. I think almost more. By helping and volunteering, they kind of built a real support network for themselves. So I think for me, as part of being inclusive, that's one of my things, is actually by joining a volunteer organisation. It's one of the best ways to meet like-minded people. And it's probably one of the reasons why I decided to also start doing Creative Mornings in Hanoi, because I thought, oh, that's a way I can meet people, you know. So it's one of those things. So if you have a problem, then it's like come up with a solution or do something about it. Okay, and this is another big project. This is part of an outdoor art project. Again, it's really hard to see the scale, but we're probably 9 metres by 3 metres. And this again, it's the materials that are using for safety fences, but I've layered it and joined it so it looks like, but a larger version of the patterns that you see that the wind makes on the sand dunes. Okay, so and this particularly, the whole, like Dubai is what they call like a shock city. It's growing so fast and so quickly that it almost feels like everything's under construction. And then if something has been finished, it'll be being pulled up and remade again because the city is changing so fast, nothing's staying fixed. So again, a bit closer up, and underneath I had little shimmering fabric. But this again, I couldn't make it by myself, so I had some friends who were coming to help me make it as well, because it was quite a large scale undertaking to make it. Then another friend helping me take it up and install it. Okay, so and as an artist, you always need support. And then here, this is another big project. So over here we have, I think that's Margaret Wertheim. So this is the Institute for Figuring, and they had a project with New York University in Abu Dhabi. So they wanted to bring their collection, and they could use crochet to demonstrate mathematical and scientific principles called hyperbolic space. But as they were making these models to try and use them as teaching models for science and physics, they realised they looked a lot like the Great Barrier Reef, because initially the sisters are from Queensland. So, and then from there it became this very large inclusive project that's been travelling the world for, I think, maybe at least 10 years now. So with Abu Dhabi and the university, they were like, oh, we need someone to create the satellite reef, because each time they go to a city, the community also makes a reef that goes into the exhibition. And I just was very fortunate. I went to the talk, I put my name down saying I'm interested if the project comes off. And then a year or two later, they said, oh, we're actually doing the project, are you still here? And I went, yes. And then after a talk, I became the community project person. So I spent more than a year working on the project in Abu Dhabi. So this is the end result. So this is the end result of many, many workshops. I went to labour camps. I was working with, I would have a weekly get-together where people would come and crochet. So anywhere where someone was interested, I would go and show them how to crochet and give them wool so they could join in. So all of this is made up of lots of small pieces that were combined together. So a real community inclusive project. And each of these, there's 7 of them to represent the 7 emirates in Abu Dhabi, in the UAE. And the other nice thing is, if you have a look at the next slide. So here you can see another aspect of it. You see, so some are really big bits, and then lots of smaller bits would be put in. So that was beautiful. It was really lovely time putting them all together and coordinating. Okay, and then there's only a few of the people who were involved in the crochet for the project. But I still have women, and that's quite a few years on, and they'll still say to me, oh, I really miss that time where we were all sitting together and crocheting. And I think part of it, because when when you're sitting together and you're working on something and it's just side by side, these really interesting, rich conversations come up. Whereas if it's, but if you're doing something together, it's kind of really natural in a way that it's like if you sit down together and say, oh, let's talk, it doesn't quite work. So I think it's really important sometimes is having a shared activity is a really inclusive way to approach things. And this is another one, it's a little bit different, but most of my art practice involves the outdoors. So as part of being inclusive in this art project, so on one side of the bus, it's like a trick artwork. If you look at it very closely, because the theme this year was literature, I think. And this bus for the 3 days of the Dubai Art Fair will take people on tours to all the other gallery spaces around the city. So it's really nice to have your artwork going through the city. But if you have a look, there's actually writing that's in there. And it's an Arabic phrase that says, a book is like a garden in your pocket, which is a beautiful phrase. So on one side of the bus, it's embedded in English, and on the other side of the bus, it was embedded in Arabic. Okay? So again, that's inclusiveness. So thinking about how you can include more of the community. Okay, and then it comes to Creative Mornings as well. I think why I really like Creative Mornings is their motto is everyone is creative and everyone is welcome. Okay, so I think for me that is a really strong aspect that resonates for me a lot. So yeah, and I think the main thing of being inclusive is the skill to listen. You know, giving a bit of quiet space, so not always feeling like you have to talk. And sometimes quiet can be quite uncomfortable, but if you're quiet and receptive, it invites people to come out, you know? They feel like it's safe to come out into the environment and maybe share something with you. So I think that's the really important part of inclusive, is inviting people, but then also the listening aspect is I've found really important in my life. And maybe and how I see that maybe play out is anywhere I can be, and before I know it, if someone's sitting beside me, I've often, and maybe it's the trust in strangers, but someone's sharing their whole life story with me, and I think that's kind of wonderful and special, a skill that if you listen really well, you really get to know a lot about people's beautiful lives. Thank you for listening.